I was just thinking about some books I wanted to write. And they're all books on spiritual or theological topics.
Mm-hmm.
And I had like 3 or 4 in mind. And in fact, I had one about 90% written. But anyhow, I got to thinking, who on earth is going to want to read my books?
Yeah.
Because I was a financial planner. You know, I wasn't a pastor. I don't have a theological degree, never been to seminary, didn't run a ministry or anything like that, you know? And so it's like, I don't really have credibility in this space. Not that one actually needs to have credibility to, you know, but anyhow, I just, so that thought came to me, and then, you know, my mind wandered off. I started to think about other things, and then started to think about my grandkids. And then all of a sudden the two thoughts crossed, and I thought, oh, I could write a book about spiritual concepts and ideas for young children.
Hey, y'all, welcome to another episode of Mediocre Dads, where being mediocre is a choice and you have to refuse to be mediocre every single day. I'm your host, Queon. I go by Q, of course. And on this episode of Mediocre Dads, I am joined by a very special guest named Wayne. And, you know, we were talking beforehand, and I can already tell that he's a funny guy, and we're going to really get into some amazing conversations. And, you know, that's really what it's all about when getting on the podcast, is just having the opportunity to talk to amazing people, hear their stories, hear their experiences, and then allowing them to share their experiences with you all, and you guys having a different insight into, you know, people's lives and people's experiences, and adapting it to yours. And hopefully, you know, if it's a bad story, but it comes out good, you know, you can learn from them to make better decisions rather than making piss poor decisions in life. But anyway, diving right into it. Wayne, thanks for being on the show. Before we get too deep into the episode, though, can you kind of tell the audience a little bit about yourself and who you are?
Okay, sure. Well, thank you, Q. It's a privilege to be on the show. So I live in Lawrence, Kansas, married. I have 2 grown children. One is living on a sailboat.
Sailboat? I'm jealous.
Yes.
Gosh.
In Savannah, Georgia.
Man, son? Is it a son or daughter?
Yes, son. Yeah,
Oh,
he wants to sail around the world, but he's not quite ready.
Does he need kids? I'm willing to be his son.
No, he needs a first mate is what he needs. But well, okay, you might, sir. I mean, in every sense of the word, he needs one of those. But anyhow,
I'm joking. Sorry. Go ahead. Continue. I interrupted. I apologize.
Yeah. And then I have we have a daughter that lives in Seattle, and she has 2 children. So I've got 2 grandchildren, and we have a dog at home. And so that's my family. My career was as a financial planner, and I retired from that about 8 years ago. I started a company that does philanthropic coaching with people to help them learn how they can give more and give more effectively. And then I wrote a children's book, which is the reason that I am on this podcast.
That's awesome. You were finances for 20 years. Is that a boring job? Like, I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, right? Because you did it for 20 years, so obviously there has to be some excitement in that. But like, any person would love finance in the sense of like making money, but like finance in the sense of like crunching numbers, and you're like, hey, we can only this is our cap space here, or whatever the case might be, and analyzing all these spreadsheets and statistics and all that. That can be, for me, can be daunting, right? So like, obviously you enjoyed it if you did for 20 years.
Well, I'm an analytical type person,
Okay.
but as a financial planner, really my job was mostly working with people to help them identify what their goals are and how to reach those goals. So
Okay.
yes, I crunched numbers on spreadsheets and evaluated financial investments. But the most important part of the job was working with people and helping them meet their goals.
That's awesome. For 20 years. Okay. So like, again, I fascinated because, doing something for 20 plus years for anybody is amazing. And so like me being in the military, right? One of the incentives of staying in for so long is for being able to retire after 20 years. And so, there a lot of us end up doing so because it's not, the retirement's not bad, right? It's not a terrible, the trade-off is not too bad. Now, of course, there are some who differ, but again, the trade-off can be beneficial, being able to retire at 40 and you could get a retirement check and disability and do what you need to do, what the case might be. And so for you, was it just like, hey, I want to retire, or did you just say, hey, it's time to retire?
Well, actually, I was doing it for 35 or 40 years.
Oh, wow. Well
Um,
then, I apologize.
no, that's okay. But there were two things that kind of precipitated my retirement. One was compliance and regulations were just getting more and more. And it seemed like I was spending half my time making sure that we were in compliance and going to
Uh,
classes and all this kind of stuff. It not literally half, but it felt that way.
yeah.
Um, and the other is the company that I had, we managed our clients' money, and I did a certain amount of that personally. And the stress of managing and choosing investments for people, sometimes it's pretty high, especially when the markets are not going well.
Yeah.
And if I lose some money on an investment, I understand it. I know why. But clients don't always look at it that way.
Yeah. No, yeah. I get that piece in the sense that in the Army, if given a mission and, there's planners and they say, hey, this is how the mission should go based off, this is what we're telling you should do it, how you should do it. But implementation is always different from planning. And, everyone has a plan until we get punched in the mouth. And so, in the military, it's kind of one of these things where it's like, hey, we were just punched in the mouth and your plan actually sucks. So like we've deviated, we're doing here. We still accomplished the mission, but still getting, berated, if you will, for, deviating and, not following the plan, even though we were the ones on ground doing the plan and be like, this is actually not, this is not going to work. This is not going to work at all. So I get that. I do get that that aspect in the military sense. So for you being a father, you are a father, and you mentioned you have two older kids now. So your kids growing up, was work, did work take you away from being a part of their lives in the sense of because you were busy? I don't know how busy a financial planner is, but I imagine pretty busy when like you dealing with people's money. It can be pretty stressful. So did your work take you away from your kids at times where you wanted to be there, or were you able to balance that? How was that?
Well, no, it didn't. I didn't travel very much. I'd go on conferences or things like that.
Mm,
And my work schedule, the first few years, which would have been when my kids were young,
yeah,
I worked a lot of hours. I was in business for myself for
yeah.
almost all my career, owned my own company. And so you work a lot of hours when you're trying to get something established and going.
Hmm.
And so that did take time away from the kids. But I don't feel like it took a lot of time. I tried not to work too many evenings. We always did things with the kids. And so, if they had sporting events or something, I almost always went.
That's awesome. Yeah, because I asked that question because for myself right now, and even for a lot of fathers, especially younger fathers, I say younger in the sense of newer fathers. For the first time, they have to work for. They're working no longer just for themselves and say their significant other. but now they're working for this human being, this life that they're created. And we can all sit there and say before we have kids of this idea of like, I understand what it's like to work for somebody. Like, I get it. But then when this human being is born, when you see this human being born, they look like you, and they're so tiny and they're so small and precious and just so beautiful, right? You're like, I'll do anything for you, right? Like I will do anything for you. And then, as they grow and they get older, and, you might be missing certain things, but then you're like, but I have to, because I want their happiness I want them to be happy, and I want them to have these things, and I want them to want for nothing. You know what I mean? Like it tears us apart at times, especially in the beginning, as our kids are younger, of like, am I doing too much, or am I doing too much on the work end, or am I doing and too little on my personal life, or am I doing too much on my personal life and too little on my professional life? Because unfortunately, bills have to be not unfortunately, but fortunately, bills have to be paid, and food has to be put on the table, and if you are a provider, which I think most men should be are in the responsibility for that in that sphere, right? You understand, I got to wake up, I got to go to work, I got to pay the bills, I got to do what I got to do. So that's why I asked that question, because I do see a lot of younger dads in this is struggling with that of like, how do I balance this, do this balancing act of like giving my kids everything, but then also giving them all of me, So, did you ever have that struggle yourself? Was there ever a moment where you're just like, I don't know if this is worth it because I'm doing too much in professional life and I want to give more to my kids?
I don't know that I ever looked at it that way. I mean, I did have to try to balance things there. Certainly there were times, because it was such a struggle in the beginning, especially where I felt like, is it worth, maybe I should get a job working for somebody else. But there, as I think back, you're asking me to remember many years ago now, decades ago, what things were like. You're right in it right now. It's like a long time
I'm in the middle
for me. And so I'm trying to remember back, how much.
Well, I think it's amazing, right? Because you, like, before we got on, you mentioned, like, it's you being a granddad and how exciting it is to be a granddad. And like, I it's hard for me right now to fathom being where you are in life, right? And I say that because when I was 16, it was hard for me to fathom being 30 years old, right? Like when I was 16, thinking about being 30, I was like, oh my gosh, me being 30, I might as well be dead. You know what I mean? Like, I was just like, that's just crazy, right? Now that I'm 30 years old, I'm like, me being, I don't know, retirement age and having grandkids, that's just absurd. Like I what? No way. I'm not gonna make that long. Like I just, and obviously, God willing, I will. But still, it's as we hit these marks, in our life, we don't think them obtainable until they're almost, or they're right there, and then is kind of thinking back of like, oh wow, I did do that. I did do a great job raising my kids. I did do all these things. So one of the questions that I will say that I will ask you then is, you being a granddad, right? And I think one of the ways that we as parents can say we did a great job of raising our kids is how our kids parent, right? So for you have your daughter who is a mom and who has 2 kids, right? So the grandkids are like the receipts, you know what I mean? They're like the receipts where you're like, hey, like, all right, did you really do the goodest job as you think you did, or were you just faking the funk, right? And I would say, like, so I'm going to ask you to kind of take a look in the mirror moment. How would you say that you did, right? And this is not to say you did a terrible job, because I do believe you did a phenomenal job. But if you had any critique, how would you say you did?
Well, I guess I give myself a B.
Okay.
I think we did okay, but looking back, there are things that I wish we had done differently, or I had done differently, or not done. So that's kind of where I put myself.
Yeah. No, I get it. Because that's one of my friends told me one time. He goes, you never know how well you did of raising your kids until you become a grandparent. And I was like, what? He goes, listen, hear me out. You'll understand when you become a grandparent. He himself was not a grandparent yet, but he was older and his kids were older than mine. So, there might have been something to it, so I trust what he was saying. So gotta dive right in further into, you wrote books. You wrote 3 children's books, from my understanding. What led you to doing that, right? You were a financial planner, and then it was just like, I'm going to write these books. I got to write these kids' books. What led to that?
Well, it was not planned. Okay.
I like it. The financial planner did not plan, guys. I'm sorry. He did not plan this one.
Well, I didn't plan on writing a children's book. So, here's what happened. I was driving home from St. Louis. This was maybe 4 years ago or something like that. And as I was driving on ice, I was just thinking about some books I wanted to write. And they're all books on spiritual or theological topics. Mm-hmm. And I had like 3 or 4 in mind. And in fact, I had one about 90% written. But anyhow, I got to thinking, who on earth is going to want to read my books?
Yeah.
Because I was a financial planner. I wasn't a pastor. I don't have a theological degree, never been to seminary, didn't run a ministry or anything like that, and so it's like, I don't really have credibility in this space. Not that one actually needs to have credibility to, but anyhow, I just, so that thought came to me, and then, my mind wandered off. I started to think about other things, and then started to think about my grandkids. And then all of a sudden the 2 thoughts crossed, and I thought, oh, I could write a book about spiritual concepts and ideas for young children.
Yeah.
Maybe I can write at their level of understanding and I have credibility.
Yeah, there you go. They can't tell you otherwise.
That's right. They don't know any different. I could tell them anything,
I love it. Well, I will say, when it comes to the theological part and writing books, it's hard because I say it's hard. Here's where my mind goes. So so David, David or several of these men who are listed in the Bible, right? Except for Paul. Sorry guys, Paul was very well educated. Okay, so I have to leave Paul out of this one. Yeah. But while they were educated, right? Because all at the time, whether with Old Testament, Testament, right? Jewish children were educated in that sense. There were still those who were far superior in that sense of education, but they were able to get the word out, right? Preach the word in the sense of what we know today as preaching. And so I think we're all called, right, to share the good news, but I think a lot of us have overthink what that looks like, in the sense of like, well, I have to have these accolades in order to do so. When it's like, no, if the Lord calls us to do so, then He will give us all the tools needed to do so. And I think it's a wonderful thing, because a lot of the times there are a lot of people who won't do things because they're like, well, I don't have that certification to do said thing, or I don't have this thing to do said thing. Now, certain things in life, especially being a financial planner, please have your degree in finance. But in other things in life, I do think that we can be more, in lack of better terms, self-taught. So did you grow up in the church, or was that something later on that happened in life for you?
Yeah, no, I grew up Presbyterian, okay. And my mom took us to church. My dad sometimes came, sometimes didn't. But then in a sixth grade summer camp. They had like a campfire, and you can throw a stick in there if you want to commit your life to God. And so that's what I did, and that was kind of what I earmark as the spiritual birth of my life.
That's amazing. A few questions from that. So one, what exactly is Presbyterian?
Presbyterian. Well, they're a denomination, obviously.
So understand that piece, right?
Yes.
I guess so. Like I understand what Catholicism is, in that sense, in that domination, or Baptists, right, or Southern Baptists. Like, but what I guess what is the delineation of Presbyterian?
Well, they are Calvinists in their theology, meaning they believe in predestination and total depravity of mankind and some other concepts, which not all Christian denominations believe those things.
Yeah. Got you. Sorry, I've heard of all of them before. But never actually researched the different denominations to the point of like, oh, I didn't know that. So, thank you. And so for you at this camp, and you're throwing the stick in to saying, hey, I'm committing my life. Was it just a rash decision in the moment, or was it like, hey, no, this is a part of my life I'm ready to commit to God, and I'm ready to commit my life to God at this time, and ready to live that life, and whatever that looks like?
Yeah, no, it was a very intentional, conscious decision on my part, and it stuck with me ever after.
That's amazing. I remember being younger and like, because I grew up always going to church as well. My parents always took us to church. It got to the point where me and my brother were very, very adamant of like, when we leave this house, we're not going to church for a while. As I think most kids who grow up in church do. It was just so, I remember it was like, I think it was like 14 or 15 years old, and just feeling really called to commit my life to Christ. And I did it. I said the prayer, and then I think it was a few weeks later, I got baptized, and it was great. But I didn't actually, commit. I just said it at the moment because it felt good, and then the feeling was gone, and I didn't know how to be like, how do I get this feeling back? Because that's the only way that this makes sense. If I don't have that feeling, then it's not going to make any sense. And so it wasn't until I got older, actually, this was like 3 years at this point now ago, that is when I really actually committed my life, where it was an intentional commitment, where it was, no, I want God to be the center of my life. I want him to change my life, and I want him to not only change me, but change, impact my kids. Because I used to think growing up, like all the time, like I said, like, wow, man, why do they force us to go to church all the time? And then I have my own kids, and then I would take them every once in a while. But now my kids know it's on Sunday. It's not Sunday like they understand there's football on Sunday, and Dad's a Saints fan, and we'll watch football. However, we will go to church, barring that we're sick. Like we've been, like my youngest got all of us, the whole house, sick. I am on the tail end of being sick right now, because I was the last victim of it. But yeah, they know on Sunday, it's like my daughter should be like, oh, Sunday, she goes, we got to go to church, and then we can do X, Y, and Z. So she understands, like, hey, we're going to church, and we got to go to church first. So for you, was it the same way for your kids? Was it, hey, we're going to church, and that's just what we do in this family? Or was it like, no, you don't have to go type thing as they got older?
We actually never had too much pushback from going to church.
Oh, that's amazing.
Both of our kids had genuine encounters and relationship with Christ somewhere during their grade school years, and so they were very much interested in being involved. We did change churches when they turned around the teenage years, because they weren't connecting well with the kids in the church that we were at, and so we found another church where they connected better, because we we thought this is key to our kids going on with the Lord, that they need to feel like they belong in the youth group wherever we're at.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Actually, it's for me. So I met my wife I was in 7th grade. She was in 6th grade. I won't get into the story because several people in the audience has heard the story before. But one of the key points here that I guess I don't think a lot of people have heard or don't know is me and my wife went to the same church, and we were always involved. We were involved in the same youth group. Her dad, well, both of her parents, but mainly her dad, volunteered and was one of the volunteers in the youth group. And so very involved all the time. And so I'll be honest, when me and her started dating, going to church wasn't that bad. It was just another reason to see my girlfriend, which again, she did become my wife. So, thank you, Jesus. But it was another real opportunity to see my girlfriend outside of just school. And so, but it was one of those ways in which I think, we were together and we were going to church and involved in, and it was a great youth group to be a part of at the time for us, to now where we are, where that commitment has followed us, even though there was a few years of, like I said, where it was just like, I don't want to go to church, I'm done. But we were able to come right back, and I tell people all the time, God, Lord works in mysterious ways, but he always has a plan for us. So I do think it's amazing, though, that you guys had that willingness and that to understand, like, hey, in order for my kids' relationship to grow in this youth group, that we need to, maybe it's best if we move churches. And because I know a lot of people won't do that. They'll be like, hey, well, I'm getting what I need here at the church, at this church. I don't know if I'll get what I need at the next church, and my kids may not be getting it, but they'll figure it out later on. And so there are a lot of kids who, when the opportunity comes, they leave the church and they never come back because of that. I've seen it sometimes, and I'm sure you might have seen it in your life as well. So you wrote these books for your ultimately with your grandkids in mind, and with having that theological wanting to have that theological presence, but also the presence of everything right in there. Is that what it was, or was it just ultimately like, hey, I want to explain it like this? Because we were kind of talking beforehand about it, but was there the intention of like, hey, a more of a broader view of everything, or was it just, hey, this is my belief and this is how I'm going to follow what I'm going to put in this book? Does it make sense?
Well, yes. So when this thought came to me as I was still driving home from St. Louis, I just began to think about, well, how would I write this book? And I thought, well, what I want to do is communicate what I think are some of the most important spiritual concepts that young kids need to know. And I began to think about, well, who do I want my audience to be? And I thought, and I was also thinking about where I'm at and different things. I thought, what I think I want to write this book for is for young parents who maybe they used to go to church, maybe they didn't, but we'll assume maybe they did, and now they no longer go to church, and now they have kids, and they're thinking, well, we ought to teach them something about God, but I'm not even sure what I believe anymore. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, how can I write this in a way that would draw them in and not put them off? And so I wrote this book without any religious language in it, no dogma. I don't even use the word God in the stories, but it's all by analogy or metaphor. And so that's who it was written for. And that's what I view as my target audience.
That's I like it. Like I said, like I was saying beforehand, I found it intriguing. I was reading the first one and I found myself rereading it and I was like, wow, this is it's simple. So many people overlook how beautiful simple is, right? Because I think we live in a society right now where it's everything has to be elaborate, and you have to have this amazing plan to kind of say this one simple phrase. But it's amazing how beautiful something simple, keeping it simple, can be, and how much more relatable it is versus, let me go through this elaborate way of telling you that God is this, and the world was created. You know what I mean? Like I enjoyed reading it. Because I read it and I was like, man, I might read this after our episode, of course, to my kids if they're still awake, to bed, because it was one of those words like, wow, I think they would get, there was actual value to get out of this, and I like that's what's important as a kid's book, is for it to get value, and for kids for parents not to feel like they're reading something that they have to believe in, right? You know what I mean? Like, so for those parents who don't go to church, and they're like, this God, maybe, right? It doesn't pigeonhole them or force them to have to feel like I'm reading my kids' religion and I don't believe in religion myself. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
Right.
I love that. I do love that aspect of it. And so when you made your books, in printing your first books, did you give it to your grandkids? Did they get the first copies?
Yes, they did.
That's amazing. Did they get a signed copy? I hope they got a signed copy.
And I even signed it. There you go.
That's awesome. Oh man. Well, okay. So what did your wife think? What did your kids think? Right. You're like, hey, I'm going to write these books, and for the grandkids, and especially your daughter, you're like, hey, I'm going to write these books, and they're going to be great for the girls. What was their original feedback? Was it like, that's great, Dad, I can't wait to read it, or was it like, are you sure? I don't know if I could teach them financial planning at this age. Like, what was the feedback?
I think it's like, you wrote a children's book? Really? Okay. Why?
Yeah. Oh man. Oh. Just like, oh, why? Because I love. Oh man, that's so awesome. Our kids know. And I think you can attest to this. No matter their age, they'll always find a way to be honest with us, and it's wonderful, right? Because my daughters right now, especially, love to be honest with me, and so I hope the honesty continues, in so many ways. And so, what about your wife? What was her response? Was it similar, or she was like, oh man, got you, babe, can go write those children's book? And I think that, yeah, that makes sense for you.
Well, she's like, well, you don't talk about Jesus in here, or, you don't use the word God. And, so she thought I should be a little more explicit.
Yeah.
And, but I explained to her that, my target audience here might be offended, or I don't care about offending people, but
yeah,
if you can't get in the first door, or, get in the door,
yeah,
then you can't read the story. And so this is just a way of making an entrance into their life, when otherwise they might be closed.
Yeah. And I mean, in all your books, though, they do explain at the end, like, how you correlate like, hey, God is how you refer to the light as God and all that, right? So like, there is that entrance, but again, as you said, you have to have a way in, right? With so many people, and if for people who are not believers, who are not believers, if you tell them if you say like, yeah, this is a Christian book, immediately just gonna be like, oh, you're trying to force this down. You're trying to force your beliefs, your religion down my throat,
right?
When it's rather than, it's like, no, listen, look, I think you should read it for yourself. It doesn't refer to God. And then reading, you're like, oh wow, okay, great. Again, phenomenal thinking, and this is not my brain's not there yet. This is why I can't write a children's book yet, y'all, because I'm not that crafty yet. And it's not crafty in the bad way, but like crafty in the good way. Like I'm not that good yet, So I did want to ask you some advice for myself. So I'm going to take the moment here, y'all, the remaining time we have here, to be very, very selfish. So with your daughter, she's grown now. She has kids, and I imagine she's married.
Yes.
Awesome. So, what was it like when she brought this boy home and said, "Dad, this is my boyfriend," which then led on to, "Hey, this is my fiance." Like, what was that? What was that first moment when you met this boy who, at the time you didn't know was going to be your son-in-law? But what was that first moment when meeting him?
Well, I guess so this is her second marriage.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So which
I
boy are you
apologize.
talking about here?
Oh, well, let's go with her current marriage.
Oh,
I'm sorry,
okay.
I didn't know that.
Well,
I do apologize.
Yeah,
I
you
do
didn't know.
apologize.
Yeah, it's no problem. So, well, she is living in Seattle, and so and her husband is another doctor in the same hospital.
Oh wait, your daughter's a doctor?
Oh yes, yeah.
Okay. All right, folks. Well, listen. All right. So obviously, there's a lot is going to change in this conversation. That how did you convince your kid to be a doctor? Let's go there first. How did you convince your daughter? I need my kids to want to be doctors or lawyers. How did you do that? What did you say to them? Say, hey, I think this is really a good path for you to go to be a doctor.
Oh, I didn't have to convince her. She had to convince me.
Oh, geez. What do you mean she had to convince you? Well, I guess school's very expensive. So I mean, yes.
Ever since she was 12 years old, she wanted to be a doctor. That was just, I don't know what initiated that. That was just her goal from age 12 on.
Man. And so when she was going to college, you're like, so you sure you want to do that doctor thing still? Or there's other things you can go to school for.
Well, she, there's kind of a story there. She was a gymnast in college. And so then after college, obviously she went to medical school. And when she was getting near the end of before she went to medical school, I said to her, okay, Corey, I've always told you can do anything you want in your life. Okay.
That was a lie. I lied.
Okay. But there's one thing you can't do. When you get through with medical school, you can't decide you want to be a gymnastics coach.
Dad, I don't blame you. I don't blame you at all. Set some ground rules. Listen, you go be a doctor with the best doctor you can. But at no point do I ever want to hear, Dad, I'm going to go coach gymnastics. No, you go to that hospital and you go save lives. That's what you're going to go do. Man.
Right.
What did she say? She's like, no, Dad, I'm never gonna want to do that.
Well, she laughed and she said, no, I don't want to be a gymnastics coach. I want to be a doctor.
Good. Yeah, look, Corey, don't stay the doctor. Doctors are useful. They're needed. And, so I'm sorry. So, so her husband's a doctor as well. Gosh, her kids are freaking loving life. Could never get out of going to school, by the way, but loving life, I'm sure.
Well, they have a pretty good life, but a doctor's life is very busy.
Yes.
And so, it's very demanding. But I think my kids get a lot of mother and father time, and I think it's great.
So her current husband is a doctor as well?
Yes.
Okay, what kind of doctors are they? I don't know too much about doctors and their specialties, but what kind of doctor is she?
They're both pediatricians, which means they're children doctors.
Listen, their kids are never ever going to escape. I'm not feeling too good. Come here, I got you. We'll do it. We'll do a thing right now. You don't have to go. You don't have to leave the house. And they're gonna be like, no, right. You're good to go. You're going to school. Get on that bus. I'll see you when you get home.
You can't fool me.
Yeah, man. Oh, man. Oh, okay. So did her and her husband, they meet at the hospital she was working in or?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Man. And so when the time came and they're dating, I'm sure dating for a while. Let's go to the first one when you first met him, right? Again, because her being a doctor threw me off completely. I'm sorry. I did not know that your daughter was a doctor.
It doesn't matter.
Well, it doesn't matter. But look, we all want our kids to be successful, and truthfully, hearing that your daughter is a doctor, that is, for a lot of people, that is like, hey, that's where I want my kids to be, right? And it's and it's nothing to we as we get older, right? I know we start to realize like, hey, whatever job you do, I just want you to care about what you're doing and love what you're doing and be happy what you're doing, right? In the end, that's what we want for our kids. But again, as speaking to the younger father, in our minds, we have this thing of like, well, in order for my kids to be successful, they have to have these superior, these sophisticated jobs, right? Such as being a doctor, being a lawyer, being a Congress member, right? Like or being a senator, right? Like we put these heavy ideals on our kids because we're like, I just don't want them to ever have to worry that they can't provide, and especially for when they have families and they have kids. And so we put these things on their shoulders, and we're just like, hey, like, if you just be a doctor, you don't have to worry. If you just have to be a lawyer, you just don't have to worry. You know what I mean? Like, so for a lot of us, it's a very much of a man. If my kids could do that thing, it'd be great. But like, it's great because your daughter wanted to do it and has a passion for it, and I imagine is loving what she's doing right now. And so like that's all we want for our kids. And at the end of the day, so again, that's why I say that. But so when you first met her husband, what was that initial reaction? Was it, I mean, I obviously imagine she's a little grown up at that point, but still, what was that initial reaction? You got like, hey, you're meeting this man, you're like, all right, who is this guy? What does he want? Like,
well, my daughter at that point was obviously an adult and probably around 32 years old or something like that. So, he was, when we met him, he was a very nice guy, very kind, very considerate, and I liked him, so,
yeah.
So it's good. And he treated her well. And so we were all for it.
That's awesome. I asked, like I said, I asked before because, selfishly, one of my fears or the things that I'm not prepared for is dating. And so like, everybody's like, oh, you have girls, like just, their boyfriends are going to be in the future. And I'm like, absolutely not. They're going to stay in their rooms till they're 30. So like, that's just how it's going to work, I guess, like they're not leaving. I don't know where you thought they were leaving. But obviously my kids are going to leave the house at one point. For my wife's sanity, they need to leave. But like, so for you, right, especially when your daughter started dating, what was that like for you? Was that hard? Because I imagine for all dads it's hard. So like before she was married, but like dating, was that hard?
Well, sure, you're concerned, about what they do, and
yes,
and when you're not there, and with a guy, and well, having grown up as a guy, I know what guys want to do.
Yes. Having been one myself, I am very familiar. Well, and that's the scary part is like, you're like, where you go to a movie? No, absolutely not. No, you may not. No. We got a TV here. And guess what? It works. That's the best part, like, oh man. I got married. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, they had a curfew, and we had a rule in our house that you can't be in a room alone with your boyfriend or your girlfriend with the door closed. You could be in your room alone, just got to leave the door open.
Yeah. Hey, listen.
And I'm sure we had other rules that my kids could probably tell you, but I don't remember them at the moment.
They're like, you got this rule, this rule, this rule. And you're like, I don't remember that. But hey, if you said it existed, I'm sure it existed. Oh, man. So I got married when I was 19. My wife is 18. So, and I'm sure you can imagine, 19-year-old me going to being freshly married, and then and it's just kind of like asking my father-in-law, hey, can I marry your daughter? First and foremost, did you make your son-in-law do anything when he asks you to marry your daughter? I have to ask this question because it's a key part of my story. But did you make your son-in-law do anything when he asked you, before he asked you, or during, to marry your daughter?
I think the only thing I can remember is that I asked him if he would. I don't remember how I phrased it, but just that I just wanted him to treat her well.
Well, I would have
yeah.
I would have envied you as to have you as my father-in-law. My father-in-law made me run up a mountain, and so yes, to my future son-in-laws, just know you will be running up a mountain, and then we'll go to get breakfast, and then you can ask me. Yeah, so my father-in-law, he made me. We ran up. So we're originally from Arizona, and there's where we're from. They're called the White Tank Mountains, and he loves trail running, and so I am not a trail runner. I am a road runner. I can run on the road and can deal with some inclines and declines, whatever. I can deal with that. Not a trail runner. And so we go running up this mountain, and we run about 1.5 miles up and then 1.5 miles down. And at the final flat end part, I'm thinking, like, man, I can't wait to be done. He's like, I'm going to beat you to the end. And then he kind of like starts taking off. And I'm like, I don't care if you beat me. And he turns around and he goes, don't let me beat you. And I'm like, okay, so don't let you beat. So I'm like chasing him, and I'm like, oh, like, and like, if I remember correctly, I think he technically still beat me, because he got a head started, because I say he cheated. But if he was telling the story, of course he didn't cheat. He told we were both had the same amount of time and space. I was just slower. And then he took me to a bagel shop. And we sat, had coffee, and I'm just like breathing really hard, sweaty. And he goes, and he doesn't look like he's tired at all. And he goes, well, so what are we doing here? And I'm like, well, I want to, and I ask him. He says yes, and then we start having conversation, and then I asked him the question. I asked him, I'm outside of asking if I can marry his daughter. The question that I did ask him, that was really burning on the inside for me was, I know we're gonna get in arguments. I know we're gonna argue, because couples argue, people in relationships argue. We're not 100% the same. I said, but is there a fear that you get an argument, and it's just gonna be that's the one argument that you guys can't get past? You know what I mean? Like that argument in which you're like, oh, this is it. This is gonna be the thing that ruins our relationship. And he kind of looked at me for a second, and he goes, that could be any argument. And I go, what do you mean? That's not reassuring me at all. Like I don't want to be. Because I believed at the time that people got divorced because they couldn't get along over an argument of some sort, right? It was they couldn't decide, color of the room, or they couldn't decide, this or that, right? Like I thought that's what couples were getting divorces over, but then not realizing that within his answer, and what I learned over time was, any argument can really lead to divorce. It was, what are you willing to do to fight for that person in the sense of, hey, like, am I going to really allow this disagreement to be the reason why we can no longer be together? Or am I going to realize we've been through so many things together? There is a conclusion to this where we are both happy, right? And for my men, I'm sorry, I'm saying that just to appease you. There are a good portion of the times where what you're really saying is where she's happy, where she wins, and you just kind of like, yes, this is what we both wanted. But I do, in all jokes aside, I do believe at some point there is a point where we come together. So for you, and my final question to you is, what advice would you give to that young man who's about to get married, who's going to be a father, who is about to be a father soon, right? there's a lot of worry, especially having daughters and whatever the case might be. What advice would you give to them?
Before they get married and gonna, is that what you're saying?
Because
okay.
before they get married, especially, and then especially when they find out they're going to be fathers, right? Because those are two big milestones in their lives that we all I think as men we're kind of prepared for, but then it happens and we're like, I don't think I was prepared for this as much as I thought I was.
Yeah. Well, I think probably the most important thing would be to say that you need to love your wife like you love yourself. I mean, we always take care of ourselves, but you need to think about your wife. What does she want? In fact, a question I ask myself a lot is, what does it mean to love Judy? And, and that the answer to that question changes every day. She needs something one day, she needs something else another day. And so humility, that's a big thing. You don't have to be right. In fact, it's not about being right and wrong. It's about loving each other. And that means sometimes allowing them to get their way, or you just disagree. And in fact, I've heard this from 3 different sources, so it must be true that that 70% of disagreements that couples have are irreconcilable. That is, they'll never come to an agreement on 70% of the issues. And so you have to learn how to live with your spouse, live with each other on things that you don't agree with. And so how do you learn to respect?
Yeah. No, well, I will say that is wholeheartedly true. One, I think it's amazing. That statistics is amazing because it's 70. I think you said 70 or 77%. Still, that's a high number. 70%.
Yes,
that's a ridiculous number. But if I could think, I can think of like 5 different disagreements that me and my wife have had that we have never actually come to a conclusion. So it probably has to be true. Yeah, you said it, and I was like, well, I can think of like a good 5 different agreements, and like even like I'm not gonna go hash them out again after the podcast, but like still, like it's just one of those things where you're just like, well, it's all right, and I like we said, it's not about it's not about who's right and who's wrong. Even though I'm a big person who likes to be right, it's one of my
so
flaws.
do I.
It's just one of my flaws. I like to be right. Right to the point where, I growing up, my mom would always say that, that the women are always right. And so I got to the point now where I tell my wife, I was like, I'm right 90% of the time. And that other 10%, I'm probably right. It's just, you just don't want to acknowledge that I'm right. And so that's what I say to my wife. She doesn't like it, but it's funny because, there are moments that I can see, like based off her reactions, that she knows I'm right, but she doesn't want to admit defeat. And guys, it's not about being right. Man, it is about being right. Be right as often as you can. I'm joking. But no, I got you. I say that all jokes because I do like being right. It is one of my flaws. Even though I do strive to be more humble. Especially for my wife, right? Because we are to love our wives like we love like Christ loved the church. And after a while of just trying to be right, it's no longer a relationship. It's just like, haha, I got you, I'm right again. So it doesn't feel like you're in a relationship with somebody. So final question then, what would be the advice that you would give to new dads? Because I'm sure you remember when you officially became a dad. And probably fear but joy all at the same time. But what would be the advice that you would give to young dads?
Do everything you can possibly do to stay involved in your kids' lives. You have to limit work, you have to limit other things. Got to be involved at all ages. Parenting doesn't actually ever stop.
Yeah.
But always stay involved. Don't ever close the door. Even when your kid gets older and does things that you don't agree with or don't like or believe in, you have to love them through it.
Yeah.
Just like God loves us through everything.
I'm sorry. I said final question, but I do have one more question. Because you said it and it made me think of it. Because I think I thought of my dad. Has your kid? I'm sure your kids have made decisions, especially as they're adults, right? But like when they were young adults, and they made a decision, and you're like, hey, have you ever sat there and it's like, I wouldn't do that if it were me, but I'm going to give you this advice. If you take it, you take it. If you don't, go forth and hopefully it succeeds. And it failed. Did it hurt you more that they didn't take your advice, or did it hurt you more that they failed in, even though we want to see because we really want to see our kids succeed in everything they do, but did it hurt you more that they failed and they're kind of hurt? They're hurt by it. And that can be in any sense. It doesn't have to be like a big failure, if you will.
Yeah, I think that when well, first of all, I'm very careful about not giving unsolicited advice, because that will frequently come across as criticism.
Gotcha.
And so I try to wait until they come to me and ask for advice. And if there's something that I feel like I absolutely have to say something about that they haven't come to me about, I would think about how can I do this most diplomatically, or maybe approach it with a question, an open-ended kind of question. But there's been a number of occasions where even advice that they've sought after wasn't followed, and the results have not always been good. But I don't really get angry about those things so much as I feel bad that, why did you do this stupid thing? You were forewarned.
Oh man, a phrase that I've learned from the Army is do stupid things, win stupid prizes. And so like I don't think that every decision that people make or kids will make is stupid. So I'll preface it with that. But there are times where I will watch my kids do something, and they're younger right now. My kids are younger right now, but I'll watch them do something, and I'll say, "Hey, I wouldn't do that for you. You could hurt yourself." And they will both look at me with the most serious face and say, "No." And I'll say, "You know what? Fine, go for it. That is just you hurting yourself falling down the stairs. We have insurance. I have no problem. The TRICARE Army pays for it. I'll take you to the hospital if you need to. But I've warned you not to do that." And they'll fall and hurt yourself. And my oldest one, she'll come crying to me, and I'll be like, "Well, I told you not to do that, and you told me no. And I love you, and I don't like to see you hurt. At the same time, this pain that you're feeling right now will remind you to maybe, one, listen to Dad in the future, and two, maybe not to do that thing that you just decided to do." Right? So even though in the back of my mind, all I'm saying is do stupid things, win stupid prizes. My kids are too young to hear that from their dad right now. When they get older, maybe. When they're teenagers, definitely going to be a phrase that they hear all the time. So,
well, and I answered your question for adult children and not for young children.
Absolutely,
give advice and things unsolicited.
Well, this is why this conversation is great, because your kids are older and you experienced all the hard years. I think those are more or less the hard years, right? The adolescent ages, and the adult ages now. So, I am not there yet, and I one day when I do get there, I will, hopefully, it will be a smile on my face where I can be like, but I'm sure missing the moments like when they were younger.
So I just want to say one other thing about standing with your kids no matter what, especially when they get older and do stupid things. So our daughter did something really stupid that was very hurtful to her and her husband, her first husband, which resulted in the dissolution of their marriage. And when this happened, she was up in Seattle, and so I flew out to Seattle to be with her, and as her marriage was breaking up, and I told her that she knew what she did was wrong and damaging, and I told her, I love you anyhow, And there's nothing that you can ever do that will diminish my love for you. I might not agree with it. I might really feel hurt by it, but I won't love you any less. And I even went so far to say, if you do this again, I will still love you. I hope you don't, but I'll still love you.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing, because I think for daughters especially, even for daughters and sons, but more, I'd say more for daughters, is they want when they do make mistakes, they just want to know that you still love them. And I see it in my oldest daughter where she'll do certain things to get my attention, to see if dad's really paying attention. And I'm not saying your daughter did that to get your attention. I did what she did or whatever it was to get your attention. But I'm saying it is, my daughter being a younger age right now, is to do certain things right to get my attention. But then she'll also do certain things thinking that this is going to make dad proud or whatever, and then come back and be like, Dad, look what I did. And you're like, sweetie, I love you, but why did you do that? That is dad's $800 camera that you just decided was going to be your new toy. Please leave the area now, so I can be alone. So, but yeah. So no, I mean, I think it's very important that no matter what, we still love our kids, no matter what. And like, that's the biggest thing, it does make me think of there have been several news stories where unfortunate things have happened, and the parents of those individuals will come out and they'll be like, and they'll say, hey, I still love my son, I still love my daughter. And I always think that is, while what that individual did was wrong, tragic, and whatever the case may be, I always think that's still beautiful, because as your parents, you're like, hey, that's still my kid, and I still love them, right? And it's I say all to say, because it's one of those things I thought about I was actually recently thinking about, was like, no matter what my kids do, I still love them. I'm still going to love them, and I want them to know that. I want them always to know that dad loves them, no matter what. Man, Wayne, I appreciate you coming on. I really do. It's been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I appreciate all the insight. Guys, listen, Wayne's information, everything that you need to know more about Wayne will be in the description below. His description for his books will be in the books, or the titles and everything, links for his books will be in the description below for you all, so you guys can go check them out. I highly encourage you to purchase them. One, just to support Wayne and all that he's doing, and then, but two, to read the books in for your kids, and the insight that they have in there. Very simple, but still very beautiful and easy to follow along, and good children's books to read overall. And then, guys, of course, as I don't know if y'all can tell, you probably can tell at this point, go check out the website, www.mediocredads.net, and you can check out the merchandise. It's now available. Wayne, so this is just kind of give you some insight. I just got my merch, so this is the first time that people are actually seeing it on the podcast, so very special episode for me in that sense. So I do appreciate you being a guest. But guys, like I said, please go check it out, go purchase some merch, support the channel, whatever you do, and of course subscribe. And as I always say, guys, being mediocre is a choice, and you have to refuse to be mediocre every single day. That's all I got. Mediocre Dads out.
Okay.